Hello, Internet. It's Quintus. So one of the biggest questions I get all the time is, hey, what skills do you use? What morphs do you use? Our skill line is pretty restrictive, and we only get the skills that we get. There's no real options other than morphs, but those choices can be pretty impactful. So I figured I'd make a quick video over the different skills, how they apply, strengths and weaknesses to each. Now, I am coming from this from the perspective of a PvP player, like always, but I will try to give some PvE insight to some of these because I do some PvE with trials and stuff once in a while when I have to. So we're going to start with probably the most. I'm going to try to keep this concise, but some of these do require a little extra explanation. Also, as far as passives go, I kind of go over the passives in my passives ability video, so I'm not really going to go into depth with these. I might touch on them a little bit, and then I'm especially with the ones that relate to timer, because I have a video coming for timer specifically that's already done that I'm going to be releasing as well. That will give you more explanations on the timing passive. So let's just jump right into the actual skills themselves. Starting with the transformation. So this is an ultimate ability. Put it on your bar. It is your ultimate. Whenever you're out of werewolf form, you don't get any bonuses or negatives for being a werewolf. However, having werewolf transformation on your bar gives you a passive, or what you could call a passive for being a werewolf, and that is for it being slotted, you get 15% more stam recovery. And you get this while you're in form too, because it's technically on your bar while you're a werewolf as well. So this is pretty nice. You don't get any of the other weaknesses, the poison weakness or Fighters Guild, the extra damage from Fighters Guild or anything, unless you are actually in werewolf form. For more details on the passives that apply and the stuff that you get, look at my passives video. So the actual werewolf transformation increases your max stam, and then there's a couple. It lasts for 30 seconds. It costs ultimate. The base cost on it is 300 ultimate. You can get this down pretty low with a couple, depending on your class, race, gear. You can get this down fairly low. I'm an Imperial Sorcerer, so my base cost is usually 240. So you pop it, you get 30 seconds base, but you'll get more than that because of your passes, and you'll be able to refill that timer a variety of ways. The different morphs that we have access to are Pack Leader and Berserker. Now, for most new players, I almost always recommend starting as Pack Leader. It's more forgiving, and it's easier to maintain your timer on this because of one of our passives. Your timer will last significantly longer, even if you're solo. So here's what it gets you. You take 10% less damage. So in PvP, that's super hot. You also get 2 dire wolves next to you that do some damage. It's kind of negligible, but they do some damage. But our passives say for every other werewolf or wolf in the party, it extends your timer a good bit. And again, that's going to be in the timing video. We also get minor courage, which increases our weapon and spell damage, which is also really nice. Not just us, but our entire party. Wolves or not, they get this buff. So this is Pack Leader. It's pretty good. You get some extra punching power with the spell damage. You take a little less damage, and it's easier to stay in form. All in all, this is the easiest form to play in, especially as a new player. Then there's Berserker. Berserker is generally what you're going to use for parsing in PvE. If you want the most damage, you're going to go this. You don't get the minor courage for the extra damage. However, you do get a really nasty bleed. You also don't get the damage reduction, so you're going to be squishier. You get a really nasty bleed on your light attack. It's one of the nastier bleeds in the game. And your heavy attacks do some splash damage as well. This is a really mean morph. The bleed alone is the reason why people take this morph. The heavy attack thing isn't really a big deal, but the bleed, especially in PvP, even with all the damage reductions and resists, I see this bleed tick for between 1,000 and sometimes upwards to 4,000 damage per second on players. So it's pretty nice, but it is harder to maintain form, and you're going to take more damage just in general because you don't have the passive reductions from Pack Leader. All right, let's jump over to Pounce. Pounce is probably one of the more complicated ones to explain because it does relate to timer a little bit too, at least on one of these. And also there's 2 activations on this skill. So the base skill is you pounce at your enemy. If you've ever seen a werewolf and you see them dive at somebody, this is the ability that they're using. They pounce at them, and within 5 seconds, they can hit the button again to cast the ability called Carnage. Carnage hits, it looks like a cone, but the base ability is just a single target attack. And it will cause that target to bleed for about 10 seconds. It technically is an execute because it does more damage the lower on life they are, you're never really going to kill someone with this. Even if they're at no life whatsoever, the most I've ever seen this tick for, even with full damage builds, is like, that I remember, is like 2,000 damage a second. So you're not going to kill someone, but it's nice for dot pressure. The reason why this is nice, other than a gap closer, is the second activation on the two morphs is substantial in how you play. Brutal Pounce turns it into a cone. So rather than hitting a single target with that second activation, you hit everything in front of you. After you hit everyone, when you hit everyone in front of you, every person that you hit with that second activation increases your weapon damage by 100. Up to 6 times, so up to 600 more weapon damage. And because we're werewolves and because we amplify weapon damage, it winds up being a lot more than 600. This is really nice. It's also, like, a lot of werewolves I know don't know this. You can stack this multiple times. So if you get 6 people with the first activation, great, you have your 600 weapon damage. But if you can only ever hit the same person, like one person over and over again, like you're dueling, as long as you don't let that brutal carnage lapse, you can continually hit them with it, and you will get another stack. So you can get 6 stacks from 6 activations on the same target if you do it over and over and over and over and over again. In parsing, this is pretty required to keep this up, to be able to get the most out of your damage. And it is the main PvE morph that you'll be choosing. Feral Pounce this isn't used a lot, but it does have some use, especially if you are a solo berserker. It's kind of required. So it keeps it a single target, so you don't get that cone bleed for the second activation. So you hit a single target with that second activation. However, every time it ticks, you get a second back on your werewolf timer, which is nice. You also get back some stam. I think it's 100 stam base at rank 4. So this is great if you need some extra sustain, or if you're just a berserker in general and you need that extra timer. This is the one that you would choose. Let's go over here to our main heal. This is Hircine's Bounty. This is the spammable heal that you can hit. Well, as spammable as you have Magicka, it's pretty expensive. So every time you hit it, you're going to heal a chunk of life at the cost of probably about 1/3 of your Magicka bar, 1/4 to 1/3 of your Magicka bar every activation. It scales with your max health, so the more health you have, the more this will heal. And if you're already at max health, you instead restore some stam, which is pretty nice. Being slotted, you gain major brutality. This is not, or in sorcery. We go over that in the passes video as well, but it's nice to know that you'll pretty much always have it slotted unless you just want to have empty slots on your bar. The 2 morphs of this with a lot of werewolves now are probably going to be running the Oaken Soul, so these are maybe not as important because you'll get the buffs off of both of these. But I'm going to start with Hircine's Fortitude. This is the main one that you're going to see people using in PvP a lot of the time. It heals for more. It is the more expensive of the 2 morphs, but it heals you for more, and it also can give you minor endurance and minor fortitude if you don't already have something like an item that's already giving that to you. That is nice for your sustain. It's just your main spammable heal. You generally won't use this much to get stam back because it's not a really good return ratio, but it's just overall, like, it's going to be your main survival skill to stay alive and stay healed. Second version of this is Hircine's Rage. Now, this is a cheaper morph, but heals for less. So the ability itself is a little bit cheaper. You heal for a chunk less. If you were already at full life, when you cast this, you also gain the stam, but you also get Major Berserk, which gives you 10% more damage, but you take 8% more damage for that duration as well. So kind of a trade-off. In PvP, this isn't really going to be what you're probably going to want to use, because taking 8% more damage in PvP can be risky unless you're just going a high damage build. But if your gear is already giving you Major Berserk, or if you have another source of it, there's really not a big reason to take this morph. Now, if you're parsing, you're probably going to want to have this for the buff. Getting Major Berserk off of your Howl is pretty much in every parsing build that I can find. Pretty much everyone goes Hircine's Rage. So those are the 2 morphs for that. Let's go with Roar. Roar, by default, this is our AoE Fear. that you see, any werewolf use. You roar with bloodlust, and up to 6 enemies are feared for 4 seconds and setting them off balance for 7 seconds. When slaughtered, you gain major savagery and prophecy. So this is awesome. Being able to fear people in a big AoE is nice. Knocking them off balance is amazing because that gives us the ability to do extra damage with our heavies, but also, and more importantly, restore more stam with those heavy attacks as well, which also pairs up. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about passives, but Pursuit, we just get 50% more stam from our heavy attacks already. So being able to knock them off balance makes this even better. Now the 2 morphs on this, you're not really ever going to take, well, as I say that, I haven't really seen an application where I would ever take Ferocious Roar over Deafening Roar in PvP especially. There might be a case for it for a particular build, but here's the differences. Ferocious Roar makes your heavy attacks 33% faster for 7 seconds after casting it. So if you're playing a build that uses a bunch of set bonuses for heavy attacks specifically, you may go this build and use this. Deafening Roar is what you're primarily going to use. Now, this ability generally is not used in parsing, like if you're doing trial parsing. It can be used in PvE if you're out doing world bosses and stuff like that, but generally you're not going to use this for parsing. Forgot to mention that. At least with the current rotations that I use or I see other people use. The other morph for this is what you're going to use most of the time because it is the most it's the best one, especially for PvP. Because in PvP, Spell Pen and Weapon Pen is king. And this gives Major Breach, which reduces their physical and spell resistance by almost 6,000. It's huge. On top of that, you give them Minor Maim, which reduces their damage done by 5%. So you're making them squishier, you're making them hit you softer, and you're fearing them, and you're knocking them off balance. This is a crazy good skill, and is probably one of our most important skills for PvP, and one of the reasons why we're so scary to fight, especially in like small man and 1v1. Next, we have Piercing Howl. This is your main spammable. This is what you're going to be using most of the time to do most of your damage. You're gonna get most of your kills with this because we don't have a proper execute. This is the spammable ability that you'll be using. Whenever we use this, we spit a little projectile tornado at them because that's how shouting works, I guess. Whenever you use it, you just deal some burst damage to them, and enemies who are facing you take more damage from the attack. There's 2 morphs on this. Both are usable, even though you'll probably only ever see one most of the time. There's Howl of Despair, which all this does is it creates a synergy for other people in your groups that they can hit, which grants them in power, making their light and heavy attacks at 40% harder. Now, if you are a support role, especially for other werewolves, this might be worth taking. I've done it before for whenever I run some of my support builds for werewolf pack stuff, and it's great because not only is that synergy giving them that in power, but synergies, if you have undaunted passives, also restore resources. So it's also kind of a mini sustain ability as well in that light. The main ability you're going to be using though is Howl of Agony. I get a majority of my kills with this, or like killing blows at least with this skill, because it's your main spammable. This is the skill you'll be using more than anything. So this one does 25% more damage to anything that are feared or facing you. So it ups that passive bonus of things that are facing you take 10%. This is anything feared or facing you take 25% more damage. It's just all in all really good. And this is also one of the reasons why we're hard to duel, because when you're dueling, you're always facing your opponent most of the time. Werewolves are gonna bark at you a little bit harder when you're looking at them. So there's that. That's your main spammable. Last skill is Infectious Claws. This is a cone AoE, so you'll swipe everything in front of you. This is a really good ability. You hit everything in front of you for some initial damage, and then they take another set of damage over 10 seconds. You put a bleed on everything that you hit. The difference between the 2 morphs is going to be whether or not you want healing or debuffs. So Claws of Anguish, you're going to see a lot of the time in PvP. This is giving it does disease damage. Disease damage can already give Minor Defile whenever it hits them. And then if you get Claws of Anguish, you also apply Major Defile for 8 plus 16% less healing, which in PvP is pretty massive and one of the main reasons to take it. So it's just whenever, especially if you can catch someone who's low on life, and whenever you're dueling them or fighting them or whatever, hit them with this, they start trying to heal themselves back up. I consider any healing that they get denied from this to be basically just damage on top, you know, icing on the cake kind of thing at that point. It's kind of an indirect damage kind of thing. The other morph is Claws of Life. Now, Claws of Life is going to be your default for PvE, but in PvP, it's a little trickier to use. Basically, for everything that you swipe, you're going to be healing for the dot damage afterwards. Now, if you can hit 20 players with this, yeah, it's great. But if you're fighting 20 players, that healing isn't going to be enough to keep you alive against 20 players. So that's kind of the catch-22 with this. In PvP, all damage is basically halved. If you count resists, then they're probably taking a quarter of the damage, you know, from this, a quarter to a third of the damage from this dot. And then healing is cut in half. So when you receive that healing from that ability that's already not doing a lot of damage, the healing is going to be halved. So you don't receive a ton of healing off this. However, one of the ways you can make use of this in PvP is in places like Imperial City or resources in Cyrodiil. If you hit guards with this, you still get the full value back. And you could get more value back off of it because you hit harder. You hit those mobs harder and they're dumber. So you don't have to, like, they're not really a threat to you as much. So you can hit them while you're fighting someone else and then start healing up from the damage that those are doing. So there's that. That's it. That's most of our skills, or not most, that's all of our skills that we have and the different options. I forgot to say that in PvE, you're going to use Howl of Agony. I haven't seen an application where you use Howl of Despair in PvE for any sort of reason. I'm sure there's probably one. If you're doing like an all werewolf trial group or something, I'm sure, but I've never seen that. I'm not sure why you would do that. The passives I'm not really going to go into. Devour, Blood Rage, and Call of the Pack are going to be based on your timer. That's going to be in my very next video. Look for that if it's not already out. Pursuit and Savage Strength I go over in my passives video. And Blood Moon is how baby werewolves are made. We don't talk about that because we're trying to keep the channel not X-rated. So there you go, guys. If you have any questions, if you think I missed anything, if you have anything to add, please feel free to let me know. Shoot me a message, leave me a comment, or anything else like that. So yeah, happy hunting.